Cyborgs struggling with their humanity is one of those quintessentially sci-fi plot lines that a story can take. Vic Stone is the prime example of this struggle, but there are other iconic candidates too. RoboCop, Gigolo Joe, R2-D2, Adam, these are just some of the robots whose tales of humanity make our eyes moisten up a little bit. But there is one man who does this age-old trope better than anyone else, and that man is Arnold Drake, because without his creation Robotman, Doom Patrol wouldn't be nearly as interesting as it is. He is the strongest member in a team of fabulous freaks, at least from a physical standpoint, and yet he is also the weakest, because unlike the other two members, Robotman's struggle for humanity is constant, and this isn't just a theme for his HBO Max counterpart, that struggle is a foundational part of his character. So we're not going to keep you waiting with a long intro, let's get straight into it. This is Robotman's Origins Explored. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means an awful lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
I'm in a full-blown psychological crisis, and you're offering me
He is technically DC's second Robotman. This might come as a shock to nobody, but Cliff Steele's Robotman isn't even the first Robotman that DC has ever had. That honor belongs to Robert Crane, a scientist who ended up in a situation quite like Cliff's, albeit under entirely different circumstances. For years, he had been working on perfecting a mechanical body in the hopes that it could preserve the human brain and its functions after the organic death of an individual. He and his assistant, Chuck Grayson, managed to accomplish this technological marvel, but word spread about their experiments to some rather unsavory circles, and a couple of crooks decided that it would mean a fortune if they could steal the device. So, they broke into Crane's lab and shot him fatally in the process, but were unable to even lift the machine off its podium, let alone carry it off with them. With no idea as to how it worked or even started up, they decided to flee, and when Grayson found his dying boss, he knew there was only one thing he could do. He transplanted Robert Crane's brain into the body of the machine they had been working on for years, thus creating Robotman, a crime fighter whose tale was more a legal comedy than a human tragedy, if anything. Created by Jerry Siegel and Leo Novak, this character debuted in the 7th issue of Star Spangled Comics all the way back in 1942, 2 entire decades before the Doom Patrol was conceptualized. Robotman was part of the All-Star Squadron and fought in World War II alongside the rest of DC's Golden Age roster, but in his own stories, he was struggling to find legal justice for his previous identity as Robert Crane. Robotman had to prove he was killed without any evidence on hand, as Chuck Grayson had dumped his body after the transplant and reported him as missing to keep his identity a secret, and that is usually what led to the ensuing comedy. But this Robotman too explored the themes that would later become a core part of Arnold Drake's creation, such as the time he was declared legally dead as a person, or the time when he was reborn as Robotman after saving a courthouse with his heroics, which earned him the respect and acknowledgement he had so far been denied. Admittedly, a lot of the comedy in Robert Crane's life was generated by his pet, Robbie the Robot Dog. This was the era of super pets, after all, but this Robotman's existence was brilliantly tied into Cliff Steele's story in later editions of Doom Patrol. Now that we have that fun fact out of the way, let's get into what you really came here for. He was a thrill junkie whose tragedy made him the most human member of the Doom Patrol, Robotman's origins. Arnold Drake already had the character of Cliff Steele in mind when he was creating the Doom Patrol for My Greatest Adventure issue number 80, and you can tell he wanted this guy to play a central role in his story from the get-go. 3 outcasts of society have been gathered in an awkwardly placed manner by a mysterious man who is calling them out for being quitters when they could be so much more. All 3 of them are understandably annoyed and slightly scared by the fact that this complete stranger claims to not only know them, but relate to their outcast status when he is living in a house like his. One of the 3 silhouettes gathered exclaims their adventuring days are over when the chief tries to rally them by showing them a cause greater than themselves. And as the conversation keeps rolling, it becomes clear that the wheelchair-bound chief can put his money where his mouth is. First, he shined the literal spotlight on Rita Farr, a Hollywood actress and Olympic gold medal winning swimmer who gained the power to expand and contract her body at will after a mysterious accident during a shoot in Africa. The chief reveals that he not only only knows what happened, but also how it happened, and claims Rita can now end her self-imposed exile. He moves on to Larry Traynor next, the bandaged man who was a former Air Force test pilot and who also met with a terrible accident. After being exposed to a near-fatal amount of radioactivity, Larry gained the power to project an astral being, a negative man, from his body, but could no longer be around people unless he covered himself with his special bandages. Mr. Traynor remains adamant about not helping the Chief out after his story has been given to us, and as if on cue, the third shadowy figure steps into the spotlight to tell us his story from his own mouth, except that he is not a man at all. As Rita Farr exclaims, he's a robot. The Robot Man says that he was a man once, and asks the group whether they remember the race car driver Cliff Steele, a daredevil thrill seeker who would do whatever he could for a kick. He then breaks into the story of how that same man became the robot they saw in front of themselves today. Apparently, while racing on a European track in a souped-up special, Cliff Steele lost control and crashed into the barricades of the track. He came to a hospital, fighting death, where he heard his doctors saying his case was hopeless, as only his brain remained functional. One of them then exclaimed that only one man could save Cliff's life, and Mr. Steele remembers that man being awfully short for a miracle worker, for he was indeed about to save his life. The only caveat was that now he was a human brain in a robot body. Cliff tried to assimilate himself into regular society once again, and was even somewhat happy with the fact that all his base strengths had been improved by his new body, but deep down, he was depressed at losing his humanity, which is shown in a heartbreaking panel where a couple of skiers mock him as an object, not a person. Cliff ends his recollection with a question, asking the Chief how he could not feel bitter and shunned after that, but the wheelchair-bound stranger reminds him that he can do what most humans cannot, and that he still retains all of his senses at the very least. Cliff is shocked and asks him why he could possibly know anything about him, which is when the Chief reveals that he was the doctor who operated on Cliff. His short stature was because of the wheelchair he was operating from, and Cliff reluctantly agrees that it must have been him after all. The Chief leads the three outcasts to his Manor's Nerve Center, which was a decked-out surveillance and experimentation lab, and was in the process of explaining why he brought them together when he got the opportunity to show them instead. A flash bulletin revealed that an undetectable bomb had been planted somewhere at a pier, and the Chief requested his guests to help him solve the problem. He first sent out Larry's negative man to procure the bomb, and then had Rita shrink into a size small enough to defuse it. On instinct, Cliff grabbed the bomb and shielded his teammates from accidental harm as Rita was being guided by the Chief. Larry admired her for her heroism. The Chief pointed out Cliff's bravery, and the four of them decided to work together thenceforth. This is how Cliff Steele, former race car driver and daredevil extraordinaire, became a member of the Doom Patrol. For the first couple of issues, Cliff's superhero name was Automaton, which Drake admitted was quite a stupid name for a superhero. So he switched to the description he gave of him in My Greatest Adventure number 80, unaware that DC already had a Robot Man. But because Doom Patrol was being printed by the same entity, licensing issues were not a problem, and Drake was able to continue writing the tales of his fabulous freaks. That same issue introduced one of the Doom Patrol's greatest archenemies in the immortal General Immortus, and it also exposed the many weaknesses of the team, particularly Robot Man's. Despite being made entirely out of metal, Cliff's new body worked against him when blasted with a freeze ray, although he was the only member of the patrol still walking. It wasn't after Immortus zapped him with a ray that decommissioned him until Elastigirl figured out a way to reverse the polarity and save her teammates. This would actually become a recurring theme in Robot Man's initial stint with the Doom Patrol, where he would always end up becoming the victim of a nefarious plan hatched by one of their many enemies. In My Greatest Adventure issue 84, General Immortus makes his comeback and manages to take control of Robot Man by dipping him in molten lead somehow. In issue 90, the Brotherhood of Evil member Madame Rouge takes on Robot Man's appearance to infiltrate the Doom Patrol. In issue 93, he is tricked by the Brotherhood yet again, and their leader, the Brain, is able to successfully transplant itself into Robot Man's body by luring him with the promise of giving him back his humanity. And it was from this issue onwards that we started getting more emotional context to Robot Man's existence, as at the beginning of the series, he got jealous of Larry getting all the attention from the girls and thought his robot body would never allow him to experience love again. This idea is explored further in the Robot Man Unchained storyline, which was told sporadically from Doom Patrol Volume 1, issue number 100 to issue number 105, and gave us an updated look at Cliff Steele's backstory and how he became a member of the team. Turns out, the depression he faced came after a period of mindless rage, because while he was transplanting Cliff's brain into into his new metal body, the Chief made a crucial error. This caused him to lose his mind over the fact that he was now a tin can, and Robotman went on a rampage across town, using bridge cables like jungle vines, topping over Atlas's globe like a chestnut, and threatening to flatten an entire stadium with his electricity-generating robot body. Things get so bad that the mayor calls the president for a tactical nuclear strike. This was the 60s after all, and Niles Calder begs the powers that be to let him try and fix his mistake. It's genuinely unsettling to see the man we now know as the soul of the Doom Patrol threatening nurses and tricking doctors into letting him escape in the most cartoonish way possible. But it works, and Robotman makes for a convincing suicidal maniac here. When the Chief finally corners him at the stadium, Cliff rages that he doesn't want to live anymore because life isn't worth the struggle to him. The police gathered and are ready to neutralize the automaton threat Niles had created, and they shoot insulating rubber bullets at him to prevent him from shocking the entire stadium to death. But he escapes and manages to disguise himself, seemingly making for the Ritz-Carlton thereafter. Robotman checks into the hotel, but is immediately made out by the lift operator when he realizes that somehow only 2 people had managed to halt the elevator due to an overload. Cliff escapes the police by throwing a piano at them and vows to kill the man he would one day call the Chief when he comes across an odd couple, a blind man named Mike and a poor woman named Mary. Somehow, the woman knew Cliff, and she vowed to help spirit him away from the cops. When he asked her how, blind Mike revealed that he was an expert marksman, and his cane could actually shoot out daggers. He proves it by nailing a fly to a board by its wings using only sound as his guide, and Cliff is rightly impressed. He is even more impressed by their humble abode in an abandoned subway tunnel, and almost starts to mingle with Mike and Mary's family when a comment about his appearance makes him fly into a rage. Mary points out that the 3 boys that live with them are all deformed in their own ways, and Cliff agrees, but he can't let go of the fact that he is no longer human, and nearly causes the subway home to cave in. Mary's boys save him from the wreckage he finds himself under, but another problem quickly crops up. Cliff was dying from malnourishment. His body might be metal, but his mind was still flesh and blood and needed nutrition to survive. Dr. Calder broadcasted a public exchange offer to Cliff in an attempt to reason with him and try to save his life, but he was tricked by Cliff's new friends, and blind Mike got arrested instead. After taking his brain food, Cliff leaves the family and vows to kill Niles once and for all, as the Chief desperately tries to right his own wrongs. Traveling through the city, watching wanted posters of his own face all around, Cliff decides to see if blood is thicker than water and shows up at his brother Randy's place. Cliff tries to make a case for him staying at Randy's by reminding him of all the things he had done for him growing up, but his brother is hesitant to harbor a fugitive, to say the least. Randy's wife is delighted to see Cliff, and she wants him to stay, but he takes the hint and leaves. As he's making his way out of his brother's home with nowhere to go, Cliff notices a car with suspicious-looking men inside it casing Randy's house. He decides to follow them and his brother to the facility the latter works at, and is shocked to find Randy being extorted by criminals. Turns out his wife was being held hostage, even when Cliff was in their home, and using Randy's technology, the crooks wanted to make it big. After getting confirmation that the sister-in-law was safe, Cliff reveals himself and attacks the crooks, but they simply fly away. He curses his creator for not having given him wings, just as Dr. Niles Calder figures out why Cliff is behaving the way he is, and the world is made privy to the fact that he created Robotman. Fighting through 3 blocks worth of police blockades, Cliff finally manages to reach the object of his ire and picks up a man by his collar, thinking him to be Niles Calder, but it turns out to be Larry Traynor. Turns out he had stumbled into the beginning of My Greatest Adventure issue number 80, because after a little convincing from the Chief, Robotman is back to normal and working for the good guys. Though Cliff Steele was often the reason that the Doom Patrol got into trouble with their archenemies, he was also the reason that the team maintained their unity. It was Cliff who forced Mento to take Rita out on a date because he believed his teammate only deserved the best, and though he called Larry Mummy Face, the camaraderie they shared was plain for all to see. Cliff became an inspirational uncle figure for Rita and Mento's adopted son Beast Boy as well, and could often be seen chastising the boy for his brashness and teaching him lessons on how to be a hero. Due to waning sales figures, Robotman was killed off in Doom Patrol issue 121 along with the rest of the squad when the Brain blew up their HQ, although they did save the village of Codsville in the process. But this is where his importance starts shining through even more, because unlike Larry Traynor, who remained out of action as the negative spirit found a new host, the Chief, who went underground entirely, and Rita, who never came back to life in the first place, Cliff was the only remnant of the original Doom Patrol, and that fact became clearer with every adventure that the second incarnation of the team went on, and all the reboots and reimaginings that followed.
Robotman! Cliffosaurus!
The only constant of Doom Patrol and its most human inhuman, how Robotman's many versions inspired his live-action counterpart. Robotman was the first Doom Patrol character to be revived in Showcase number 94, when his body was found by Dr. Will Magnus of the Metal Men. Given a new body, Robotman was tracked by the superheroes Celsius, Tempest, and Negative Woman, with the first of them claiming to have been Niles Calder's wife. They team up to reform the Doom Patrol and embark on the second volume of the Fabulous Freaks' fantastic adventures. But halfway through the adventure, a major shift takes place when Grant Morrison takes over writing duties for the title, and Cliff's life suddenly reaches new lows of existence. After the second Doom Patrol is all but killed off during the Invasion event, Niles Calder resurfaces and puts his team back together, with the most notable exception being Cliff, who checks himself into a psychiatric facility to cope with the fact that he cannot be human anymore. See, Arnold Drake put his brain in a robot body, but still gave him the 5 senses that made him human. Grant Morrison took away the most important of those senses from him, giving him a layer of tragic existence that permeates his on-screen counterpart's life. During his time in the psych ward, Cliff befriends and eventually falls in love with Crazy Jane. But all of this comes a bit too late, because the Doom Patrol realized that their chief was the one who had engineered all of their accidents, causing them to turn their backs on his insane ideas of helping the human race evolve beyond their flaws. Cliff was an integral part of the plan to disable Niles' nanotech New World, but ended up losing his human brain in the process and becoming fully robotic instead. His consciousness was now pure data, and his despair was only compounded by the revelation that his brain wasn't even the original at the time of its destruction. Niles had cloned it multiple times over for his mad experiments. It is revealed that the brain was supposed to be the original Robotman, hence his current state of existence, and that the Chief was inspired by the Mystery Men character for his own creation, which neatly ties Cliff Steele's character with Robert Crane's. After Morrison was done with his run on the title, Cliff briefly became the leader of the third Doom Patrol before the entire team was rebooted by John Byrne. In the Byrne incarnation of the team, all the original members were back but with renewed dynamics, having forgiven Niles for his previous actions and banded together to do what they do best, saving the world. The main storyline thread for Cliff in this incarnation is also his struggle to recover his human senses, but also his emotional struggle, as Byrne decided to make Cliff and Rita an item in his reimagining of the series. After its cancellation, Robotman resurfaced in Prime Earth with an entirely new backstory, where most of his character elements were kept the same, but with one crucial difference. His body was created as a result of nanotechnology, and no matter how hard he tried, his robot body would not allow him to kill himself. Struggling to keep your brain sentient and yours while inhabiting a body with its own code of conduct is just one of the many layers of characterization that makes Robotman such a unique existence, and we are so glad that HBO Max's Doom Patrol decided to combine all these elements into a character whose story was as compelling as the man who played him behind the curtain. If you don't know Brendan Fraser's story by now, where have you been living and where was our invitation? But the fact that Robotman and Mr. Fraser's stories collide in the way they do only serves to heighten the emotions you feel every time he curses the situations his friends find themselves in time and again. And though Robotman has the most extensive and tragic backstory out of all the members of the Doom Patrol, the HBO Max series improves even on that aspect by showing you the life he led before the accident. We don't hear a lot about Cliff's life pre-robotization in the comics, only learning that he was a thrill seeker who did everything he could to chase his adrenaline rush and then some. But the show gives us the consequences of those actions by giving Cliff a family and making him accountable for his actions in the most horrifying of circumstances. His wife cheats on him with his best friend. His children don't want to see him. He somehow manages to survive the crash that kills him in the comics, but dies when Niles' desire to see the Immortus Initiative completed reaches a breaking point. Cliff spent decades locked away in the Doom Manor, not interacting with anyone beyond Larry and Rita, but it took time, aliens, the white space, Crazy Jane, the revelation of Niles' betrayal, and the knowledge that his children were still alive for him to accept that he was the problem all along. Cliff was in denial for a long time about a lot of things, and his story in Doom Patrol was to accept those very things that somehow made made him more human in a metallic body than he ever was as flesh and blood. His struggle with Parkinson's disease is a perfect commentary on his physical immortality, because what use is a robot body if the brain working it is a vegetable? Cliff's addiction to his medication and all that follows after it is a masterclass in character development, and we can think of no one who could have played him better than Brendan Fraser. Robotman started out HBO Max's Doom Patrol as the ultimate buzzkill, but has since evolved into a caring and integral part of the new squad, and we have been seeing him wear his humanity on his sleeve ever since Season 4 started. With Part 1 nearly at an end and our fabulous freaks currently struggling with finding out a way to stop de-aging, you heard us right, it will be interesting to see how Robotman figures out his new path in the world, because for the first time in a long time, he has one. And for now, maybe that is enough. Marvelous verdict. Robotman is the soul of the Doom Patrol. Not because he's constantly getting snatched up by a face-bending French dame, or a brain in a jar, or an immortal general who wants to keep himself youthful by draining other youths of their vitality, but because amongst all that madness, he is also constantly struggling with himself. Negative Man might not be able to go out in public without giving someone radiation poisoning, and Elastigirl might turn into goop at the first hint of trouble, but to not even feel like a regular human? Now that is something that will make you do some soul searching. And Cliff Steele was the perfect character to explore those issues. His past was so chaotic that the peace he seeks now seems almost hypocritical if you knew him pre-accident. But after knowing what comes next, one cannot deny that he is the most human out of the OG 3 Doom Patrol members. If you disagree with us, let us know why in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. This has been Corey Whelan for Marvelous Videos. Have a good one, be safe out there, and thanks for watching.
I'm sorry! It wasn't me! It was my dumbass arm! I'm sorry!